Hi, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. We have a very full day ahead. So I just want to welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here. Conversations about open as we really begin, hopefully, a very exciting and stimulating day. And so thank you all for coming, especially those of you, maybe this is your first time on campus. So we appreciate you making it to the College of Staten Island. Just, I guess, a few brief announcements, as I do remind myself about your cell phones, just to make sure to put them on silent. You may also want to follow along. We have our hashtag. So, sorry. Assuming you all have a program, you can see it right up on top. So the hashtag is OpenConvo just OpenConvo CSI. All right. Also, we have an assessment for today's symposium that we'll be passing around during our last break. For those of you who are receiving a stipend for attendance, this is something to make sure to fill out and just put your name on top so we can identify you and make sure to hand in at the end of today. So. Unfortunately, our University Dean of Libraries is unable to attend, so I have the great honor of, doing the first welcoming and the pleasure to introduce our provost, who will be speaking for a few minutes. And so, of course, Provost J. Michael Parrish, Senior VP for Academic Affairs, is welcome to come up. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Amy, and welcome, everybody. Again, if this is your first time at the College of Staten Island, we're glad to have you. And I'm really excited about this event. I wish I could stay all day. Unfortunately, as I was telling a couple of people, we have scheduling meetings today, so I'm meeting with 3 of the schools and divisions to talk about classes. But OER is something that I'm passionate about, and I'm really glad that, Amy was able to get funding for this event, and that CUNY is supporting it. As I was sharing with some of the people in the audience earlier, because of our student demographic, it really is a challenge to make the cost of tuition here is reasonable, but if you then have to pay $500 or $1,000 for textbooks, you're sort of defeating that advantage. And I think that this is a time when we really have to start looking at the affordability of education, not only in terms of tuition and room and board and everything else, but the cost of textbooks and other materials. And it's a wonderful time, I think, to be looking at this, because there's been such an explosion of materials that are available, and the ease of, I think, preparing your own OER materials has gotten to a point where you really can do a tremendous amount on your own. And I had some personal experience with this, just briefly my trajectory. I came here from San Jose State University, where I was Dean of the College of Science for 11 years. I then spent a year as a special advisor to our provost, kind of spearheading the early construction and design phases of their new science building. I have to say there now. And then I had a semester between my boss, the provost, went on to become the president of the University of Northern Colorado. So I was back in the biology faculty for a semester and teaching sort of a gen ed evolution class, and also one of the ecology and evolution section of the major class. And during that semester, essentially the evolution class, we made almost entirely OER. I did have a textbook, which was a recommended thing, but the other strategy I used there was simply having the textbook was one where you could use any edition. So you could get an older version of it on Amazon for $5, so I didn't feel so badly about that. And really, you didn't need the text, I think, to function. But you look at how easy it is now to find educational resources online, and like I said, to develop your own. It's really a new world, and I think we owe it to our students to, as much as possible, take that burden of having to buy certainly the latest edition of textbooks that might cost several $100s off of them as much as we can. So I'm enthusiastic about this. I think this is a wonderful convening, and I hope it'll be, the first of many. I think, CUNY really has the opportunity to be a academy leader in terms of the development of these resources. And with that, I also am thrilled. I get to introduce our keynote speaker, and I'm going to have to read this because I just learned a few minutes ago that I was actually introducing Dr. Cangialosi. But Karen Cangialosi comes to us from Keene State, where she's a professor of biology, and she's also the Open Education Faculty Fellow there, where she's developed an open pedagogy faculty learning community, and also is co-leader of KSC Open, which is a domain of one's own campus project. And she spearheaded a movement to replace traditional textbooks with OER and other freely available resources for almost all KSC biology courses, and incorporates methods of open pedagogy in all her own courses. And I'm also I was biology faculty, so I resonate with a lot of these courses that she works with. Animal behavior, evolution and human behavior, tropical marine biology, and invertebrate zoology. And I'm sort of jealous about this next part. She also runs a coral reef monitoring program in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and a research program on the behavioral ecology of spiders in her hometown of Keene, New Hampshire. And with that, I'm very pleased to bring up Dr. Karen Cangialosi.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I love talking about open pedagogy, OER. I wanted to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Lenape, if I'm saying that correctly, that I come to you from the land of the Abenaki in southwest New Hampshire. And in October, I'm sure you did as well on your campus, had a celebration for Indigenous Peoples Day. And it was interesting to me during the discussion because one of the students said, well, in the past, education was used as a tool for colonization and erasing people's culture. And one of the elders from the Abenaki, this is Dr. Donna Roberts Moody, who's an Abenaki elder, said, well, young man, that's still happening today, and it's true. And I think we need to be thinking about the ways in which education can still act to colonize people. So we're not just thinking about the colonization of land, but the ways in which that's in our practices as well. So I just want to begin by talking about our students, right? And I know that these statistics are not surprising, or people haven't seen the fact that student debt has topped $1.5 trillion. People hear like million, billion, trillion. That's a lot of money, and there's a lot of consequences to this. If you're familiar with the Hope Lab in Wisconsin, or if you're not, I encourage you to take a look at Dr. Sarah Goldrick-Rob's work, where they've studied students. They've done surveys of students for the last few years. This is the most recent one, which is the most extensive one. So they surveyed 86,000 students at 123 2- and 4-year institutions across the United States. And so you see statistics like this, because we talk about this, and 45% of students in this survey were food insecure. And if you look at the data just for community colleges, it goes up to 67%. That's more than half of your students. And I'm at Keene State, which is a public college. It's not that different than the community colleges in that way. I've had students in my classes come and tell me they're eating like the ketchup and mayonnaise packets for lunch. That has some pretty serious consequences for who they are and what they're doing and how they are in your classroom. Housing insecure. 56% aren't really sure where they're going to be sleeping. They're couch surfing. And 17% are homeless. This is thousands of students. So I think we need to be keeping this in mind. Like, I'm a professor, and a lot of times people think, well, your job is to teach the content of biology, and it's somebody else's job to worry about this stuff. And in fact, that's not really true, right? We need to be thinking about these things together. And so definitely check out the Hope College Real College survey. And so one of the other things to keep in mind is that 50 to 80% of the sticker price of college comes from non-tuition costs, okay, which is kind of an interesting statistic. And the provost just mentioned that we have to be thinking about all the other kinds of costs that are affecting our students, and certainly one of them is textbooks. If you look at the rising price of textbooks over the last number of years, textbooks have risen, more than 3 times the rate of inflation, okay? Faster than the rate of healthcare, faster than the rate of housing, just incredibly exorbitant rates of increase of textbook prices. Publishers have essentially been gouging students, and this wasn't written by some, liberal hippie publication. This comes from The Economist, right? And it's gotten a little bit better because of the OER movement of the last few years, but it's still pretty bad. I came across this picture on Twitter, right? So there's a company that's actually saying, hey, don't worry about the cost of your textbooks. You can just donate your plasma. That'll be fine. No worries. I love this. No worries. Like, really? Like, this is what it's come to? So if we look at what the impact of textbook costs have been on students, look, 64% of them in this study, so this survey is about 22,000 students, 64% of them don't even buy the textbook. So if you're the kind of faculty member that's like, I really need this textbook, it's the best textbook. Well, if your students aren't buying it and aren't reading it, then you might need to reconsider what that really means. They're taking fewer classes. They may not sign up for a particular class because they know the textbook's going to be a couple $100. They earn poor grades because they can't buy the textbook. They drop classes. And there are other studies that show that students actually worry more about paying for textbooks than they do paying for tuition, because this is the money that they happen to have in their pocket at the time. And so open educational resources, one of the things that's nice about open educational resources is that they're free. And I mean free for students, right? They're not free to produce, but they are free for students. And we can talk a little bit more about production of OER. And so if you look at the impact that using OER has on students in comparing courses that students are taking with an OER versus using traditional textbooks, and this is about 22,000 students in this particular study, that you see that OER can improve end-of-course grades and decrease the DFW rates for all students, and particularly improving course grades at greater rates and decreasing DFW rates at greater rates for Pell recipient students, okay, and part-time students and populations historically underserved by higher education. So OER has demonstrated impacts for student learning. Again, if you're thinking about your own individual situation in your own class, you can't ignore this kind of data. An even more extensive survey that was done looking at sort of the metadata of synthesizing results from 36 studies involving 121-some thousand students, right, showed that students at least achieve the same or better learning outcomes when using OER. Again, there's a lot of data. And so when people say, oh, well, the OER is not as good, or it's lower quality, or somebody wrote it in their basement, like, that's all mythology. It's not really true. And we have data to show that OER is just as good, if not better, than commercially produced textbooks. And mostly that's because OER is written by the same people that were giving it to the publishers to let them make all the money on it. Okay. So many of you probably have heard of OpenStax. We use OpenStax Biology at Keene State. So there's different kinds of OER that are out there, not just in the sciences. Sometimes when I do these talks, people say, oh, well, you're a scientist, Karen. This is only for the sciences. And then my colleagues that do these kind of talks that are like in English departments will say, oh, that's only for you people in humanities. I'm a scientist. So, it really doesn't matter what discipline you're in. There are OERs that are available across a huge range of disciplines, and the issues are virtually the same. And here's an example of an OER textbook from LibreText. It's a music theory class. I could show you examples all day long. And you have some wonderful folks here on your campus that can help you find the kinds of OER that you might need for your particular classes. I wanted to also say that open educational resources are not necessarily just about textbooks. There are different kinds of learning materials, right? For example, these virtual labs. There are people that you can think about using open data as OER, right? Using these openly and freely available data sets, just as another example. And so I like to talk about the many flavors of OER. There's traditional OER as textbook. Like OER has been around for enough years now that we can talk about traditional OER like OpenStax. But we can also think about the ancillary materials and test banks and curated links on websites and Google Docs and using open access published articles as OER in your courses, as well as a lot of the science materials. The open science movement has brought us things like open lab notebooks and methods, as well as data sets and lab simulations and open videos. There's just a ton of material that is available, and it doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort to do it. And again, if you do nothing other than swap out a commercial textbook for some openly licensed materials for your teaching, you'll be doing your students a great service. But I'm hoping actually that you'll do a little bit more than that. Because I didn't really get into this movement solely because I care that much about textbooks. If this was just about textbooks, I probably wouldn't be here today. But I do want to mention that at Keene State, and your provost mentioned this as well, that we use OER and I'm going to say other free resources, because I'm going to say what's the difference between OER and free, and there's a big difference. And we've collectively saved our students about $250,000 over the last 4 years. Okay, and that's not just Keene State. Many colleges and universities have already saved students like millions of dollars on textbook costs. All right, so what does free mean? Like free as in free beer, as if you can find somebody to give free beer away. What does that mean? But I'm hoping that we'll move beyond this a little bit, but free is good. You know, I use free resources, and here are some examples, like the Genetics Science Learning Center at the University of Utah has some wonderful materials and resources for bioinformatics and genetics. Berkeley's Evolution 101 class is freely available. This is the Learning Center that talks about human evolution. There's a lot of good free stuff, not just in the sciences, but in other disciplines as well. And free is good. Okay, but what's the difference between free and open, and why do we care about that? Okay, so not just free, but open. Well, when you take a textbook like OpenStax or something else that maybe you've created or your colleagues have created together with you, and you put an open license on top of that, what does that mean? Well, first of all, an open license sits on top of copyright. If you create something, put it up on the web or something, it's automatically copyrighted. Okay, but if you put a Creative Commons license on top of that, what you're doing is saying you're automatically giving various permissions for this to be used. Otherwise, somebody has to call you up or track you down or send you an email and say, do I have permission to use this thing of yours? So you're saying, this is already freely available for you to use. Just attribute me, depending on the license that you choose. You can put it in the public domain and not even ask for an attribution. I tend to use the CC BY, which is use any of my stuff, however you want to use it, just attribute me. Okay? And then there's ways in which you can restrict the ability to use derivatives and commercial use, and I think the rest of the day maybe you guys will talk a little bit more about all that. And so the open license maybe gets us thinking differently about the word free, right? We're thinking more about not just free as in cost, but like free as in freedom. Like, what does it mean to move beyond thinking, just about certainly equality, treating everybody the same, but equity, trying to give everybody what they need, which is incredibly important. The reality, which is what we're facing all the time. But what does liberation mean? What does it mean to take away the shackles? And so if we think about free as in freedom, what the open license does is it allows us to have these things called the 5 R's. So when you take something that's been openly licensed, now you're free to not just use it, but to remix it and to create derivatives from it and to redistribute it in some way. And you still retain your copyright right over that. Okay? And this is what's so powerful about open educational resources. And David Wiley says, if we use OER the same way we've used commercial textbooks, it's missing the point. It's like driving an airplane down the road. Okay, so we want to be able to utilize the full potential of open educational resources and what these 5 R's really mean. And that's what moves us from thinking about just textbooks and resources to practices. Okay? And so open educational resources, well, they're usually digital, although you can print them if you want to, for sure. But the fact that they're digital allows you to do other things with them. They can be multimedia, they're downloadable. That student that can get your OER textbook on their phone and download it at the bus stop and read it on their way over to class, that has a huge impacts on learning and access when we talk about access to learning. They're adaptable because of these kinds of licenses. They can be up to date. If you use a commercial textbook and you find a mistake, maybe in 2 years the publisher will fix that in the next edition. I've been using OpenStax Biology for a while. I'll email those guys and say, you know what, there's something wrong here. It'll be fixed by in 2 days. Certainly available to the public, openly licensed, and they're free. Because in fact, these other kinds of things are what makes OER so valuable. And so the 5 R's and those permissions allow us to move, again, from that realm of thinking about resources and products to thinking about processes and practices, right? And our pedagogy. And so this is what moves us into the realm of open pedagogy. This is what's so exciting about this. And so what is open pedagogy? Okay, so there are different practitioners of it. There are different ways that we define it, and that's why it's exciting as well to get people to think differently about it. For many of us, it's about access and it's about agency, right? The ability to access knowledge because now more material is openly available, but to be able to create knowledge. So we're starting to think about students as contributing to a knowledge commons, not just consuming from it. That's a powerfully different way to think about learning, moving from that banking model of education to a much more transformative experience where students can now be the creators of knowledge and share the kinds of things that they're creating with others. And this is what open licenses and our teaching practices can allow. It also is about connecting with the community, putting your work out there to a larger audience, opening up the doors of the classroom to a much broader way of thinking about that. Other students across other courses on your campus, across other colleges and universities around the United States or even around the world. It's also about giving students ownership and power and agency over their own processes of learning. Students can actually choose how and what they want to learn. And we can't think about access to any of this if we don't think about access to the things we talked about earlier, like food and gas and laptops, or accessibility features like captions, safety. All of this becomes all of our responsibility. When we think about this collectively, open pedagogy becomes very complex, but also very exciting in the ways in which we think about how do we operationalize this in our classrooms, on our campuses? How do we as professionals in higher education actually allow all this stuff to be manifested? Okay, so the first thing I'll say is, like, you're thinking, oh, that sounds cool, I want to do this. Like, don't start with the tools, okay? Don't say, okay, here is this blogging platform, how am I going to use it? It's more about like starting with the things that are important for us to consider. So starting with questions. The questions like, how do we make education more accessible and equitable? When we say open for whom? Who actually is it going to be open for? We have to really carefully consider that. How do we authentically give our students voice and power in the design of our learning structures? How do we keep in mind the real life circumstances of our students when we design our learning experiences? How do we help the public actually see the value in what our students are achieving? I don't know if you've noticed, but the public support for higher education is on a plummeting decline. And the ways in which we can show that our students are not only doing valuable work, but contributing that work to the community might mean that somebody wants to throw a tax dollar or two back in our direction. And again, how can we provide transformational, not just transactional experiences for students? So these are some of my questions. You probably have your own questions. If you begin with the kinds of questions like, what is it that I really want to be able to do as an educator in my classroom or in my institution? Begin with those questions, then figuring out the kinds of tools that you need to do that isn't actually that complicated. Okay. So these things that I mentioned before, these many flavors of OER, kind of translate into different kinds of open pedagogies, because your students can be involved in the production of any of this stuff. And when students are starting to become creators and not just consumers, it's really such a, this is really the beauty and the gold of open pedagogy. And again, why I'm here today. So I'm going to show you a few examples, because I know people want to see, like, well, how the heck do you do that, Karen? Well, even just using an open Google document, you could put a Creative Commons license on a Google document, and you can have students collectively working on this whatever kind of assignment it may be together. You can put a link to that document, put that out to the world. It can be shared. It's a very simple way of thinking about one thing that you can do. We at Keene State, as well as some other places around the country, use what's called this domain of one's own. And you may recognize the phrase from certainly Virginia Woolf's concept of a room of one's own, right? So that every woman would have a space of her own. And this idea is that every student can have a domain space of their own, like a little slice of the web, where they can create something, and that it's theirs, and they own that space, and what they want to put up there and how they decide to shape it is behind the philosophy of this idea. And so you can use web hosting companies, you can use blogging sites that are commercially hosted. There's pros and cons to a lot of this, but it opens up wonderful opportunities for discussion with your students. There's these different kinds of platforms. I always recommend WordPress, which I put in the center here, because it's open source software. And if you use WordPress.com, it's still commercially produced, and students can get ads on their websites, and you can talk about what does that mean, and your college can talk about what happens if we just throw a little bit money so that we can host it ourselves to get rid of those ads. Maybe we can take all that money that we're spending on textbooks and put it towards something like this. So there's ways of thinking about that. Here's an example of a student of mine that created a domain space and decided to talk about nature and nurture in the context of murder, because she got to choose a little bit about what her area of interest is. And it got picked up by a blogger in Turkey, and then other people started syndicating all the other stuff that she was reading. And this is just a student in a non-majors class. Right? And so when students start to see that what they're writing, or what they're producing, what they're creating has value to somebody else out in the world, it really turns their thinking around entirely about what they're doing in the classroom. It changes the audience, right? The audience for what the student's work is makes all the difference in the world in terms of the amount of time and the effort and what it is they want to say. And we talk about having students find their voice. Voice for whom? Right? Here, students decided to write about spring break and how it's harmful, because this is part of a marine biology course, and that students on spring break in Florida will throw a lot of trash into the ocean. And she was really mad about that. She says, I want to talk about that. And so people say, well, Carol, how are you teaching all that important other material? They need to be learning about the Coriolis effect, and they need to be learning the Krebs cycle. And students actually do learn that stuff, because in order to contextualize what it is that they're interested in, they have to come and drill down to those kinds of pieces of factual information. Right? Students can be very passionate about certain things. So they may want to know, like, what is cancer? How does that work? Okay, well, you can't understand cancer at a molecular level unless you really drill down into learning about all those other little pieces, like how do cells divide, and what is a gene? And so when they're motivated to learn about that, they do eventually. And so students can create what we call non-disposable assignments. This word kind of came up from the idea that often now we'll assign papers or something, and you grade them, you put all this stuff on them, especially at the end of the semester. You want to turn them back, you put them in a stack outside your office door or something, and nobody ever picks them up, right? So what do you do with them? right? You take them and you put them in the trash can, right? We literally throw our students' work away, or we delete it out of our learning management systems at the end of the semester. You know, if they don't see the value in it, and you don't see the value in it, you know, how is anybody going to see the value in their work? And so when students can share their work, they can create work, they can find openly licensed material, they can remix it, they can put it out to the world, they can collaborate, students can comment on each other's work, they can share it to the public, they begin to really see the value of it in ways that they didn't before. And their work can live on past the end of the semester, which is pretty exciting, and they can choose to openly license it or not. Another really powerful platform is a tool called Pressbooks, which is just a way of putting material into an electronic book. And so, you know, you can create your own OER using a Pressbook platform. You can find colleagues to do it, or better yet, get your students to write the textbook. A lot of times people say to me, well, Karen, there isn't any OER in my field. I'm like, those of you that can't find any OER in your field, you're the lucky ones. You know why? Because you can create it, right? And you can get your students to create it with you. Because it's so much easier to just find stuff that's already out there and then say, oh, we're just going to use this the way we have used books in the past. But when students can create work and put it together, and then you might say, well, how can a student write upper level biology material? And I'm like, well, they can actually, and they do. I'm really proud that, in fact, just a couple of days ago, we finally released this student-created Student's Guide to Tropical Marine Biology. So this actually began in the 2017 semester where my students were creating content on their domain sites, and then the students in my 2019 semester, because I do it every other year, would take that content and edit it and figure out what's wrong and fix the links and correct some of the facts. So if you're worried about the fact that your students aren't making it perfect the first time, that's great because now you've got something to do next semester, right? They can fix that material. So the students were creators, they were curators, they decided what content they wanted to have in this book. They're editing, they're learning how to write and how to edit, and so they produced something. And the really cool thing that I'm most proud about this project is that after the 2019 class did all their work putting that together, and I realized that it still needed some more editorial work before we felt good about putting it out there. So I turned to the 2017 alumni. Okay, some of them were in grad school, one was in medical school, one had a job, and they were excited. They were like, yes, yes. I asked them, do you guys want to edit this book or have a say? And they were so excited to do it. I had like 4 or 5 students that had already graduated 2 years ago that still wanted to work on this project, not for pay, you know, just because they felt still connected to the work, and collaborating with current students. You have these alumni-student connections that we talk about. This is really a tangible way of thinking about making that happen. So it was really a wonderful set of experiences for students. So we think about, you know, beyond the walls of the classroom. This is just kind of reiterating, I forgot I have this slide in here. The 2017 class, creating content, 2019 class, curating and editing, and then the alumni, finally to the point of production where we just got that out. And there's many other examples of students creating OER. One of the most famous ones is Robin DeRosa's anthology of early American literature. So certainly within the humanities, students are using Pressbooks platform to curate content and put it together. And again, the learning comes in the process. You know, this doesn't have to be done. When I teach this class again, there's a lot more to add. There are many more things to say. There's things that need to be up to date and improvements that can be made. And students really love being parts of these processes. If you feel a little bit intimidated about the idea of I'm just going to go and make my own OER with my students or with my colleagues, there's a great community called the Rebus Community. You can go to their website and find people all over the country and other parts of the world that are putting textbook projects together. So if you're interested in like a book in North American archaeology or indigenous health and healthcare or human geography, this is just a screenshot, right? There's plenty of other projects, people saying, I would like to be able to do this. Anybody out there interested? And you can work collaboratively in the Rebus platform to do this together. Just another example of thinking about how students can contribute content. This is just an example of the iFixit technical writing project where students can write open repair manuals. I think just a really cool example of OER. Another tool that you can use if you don't want to think about like having your students create a whole book of some sort, or don't even want to use domain spaces very much. Because the other thing that I'll say is I'm giving you a lot of examples, and don't try to do everything at once. Maybe pick something that resonates with you that you want to get started with. So using a web annotation tool is a really powerful open pedagogy tool. So this tool is called Hypothesis, and you can see the .is here. And basically, all it is it creates you download a little extension, and it creates a layer over anything that you can access on the web. Almost anything that you can access on the web. So you can go to any website. You can put a PDF up here. I uploaded a PDF of an open access journal article, and my students were annotating it. Okay, so it puts this layer, and so you can see over on the right where different students can highlight a piece of text and make a comment about it. And then other students can reply to that comment. Okay, so think about all the readings that you assign, like read this ahead of time and then we'll come to class and discuss it. And like, has anybody read it? No. So when you do this, you say, okay, put some annotations on the reading, have a conversation. And those students that are shy about talking, sometimes are not shy about annotating. But the real value in this is that it's open. It's out there to the world. You can invite other classes. Let's say somebody else, a colleague that's over in another state somewhere, teaches the same thing as you. Let's have our classes together collaboratively annotate this article. Okay? You can do cool things. You can invite the author of the article to annotate with you and have wonderful collaborative conversations. Hypothesis has a really cool bioscience community where they have articles that come up periodically, and they'll do like annotation flash mobs. On January 27th, we're all going to jump in and annotate this article together. It's really fun. You get your students engaged in that. You can create it. You can say, I wish we could all annotate this particular article. Create your own annotation flash mob. Wikipedia is a really powerful tool. And if people have this reaction like, oh, Wikipedia, like don't go on Wikipedia. If you have that knee-jerk reaction, you might want to reassess that, okay? Because, in fact, millions of people use Wikipedia now, and it's very well vetted. It's suggested by some of the experts in fact-checking to use Wikipedia as your go-to, to tell your students if you're not sure if you read that's real or fake, start with Wikipedia. Okay, so millions of people see the value of Wikipedia. There's a Wiki Education Foundation that can get you to learn how to edit and create Wikipedia articles. Talk about openness, talk about audience, talk about value. In fact, medical schools have seen the value of this. Where do you go when you're like, I don't know what that bump on my arm is? You Google it. Where do you go to Wikipedia? Like the medical community realizes this, and so now they're teaching students medicine by having them create and edit Wikipedia articles. They're doing this at the University of California, San Francisco, and it's taking off in other places as well. The more people that contribute to it, the more they're doing this, the more the information is actually valuable and reliable. This is a really cool example of some folks at the West Virginia University using Wikipedia as a tool to get their students to think about gender bias, right, or racial bias. Like, where are people of color missing in these articles? Where are women missing in these articles? So if you go to Wikipedia and say, these articles kind of suck because that stuff's not in there, get your students in there, editing it, removing that gender bias, adding the voices that need to be there. So it's a really powerful thing to think about. A quote from Dr. Robin DeRosa, who works in open pedagogy a lot, that really resonates with me, that your students learn how the truth is negotiated by those that have the tools to access it, right? Like when you have the tools to access and edit and produce information, you're actually controlling what truth is, what knowledge is, what facts are, right? And those of us in higher education want to be the ones that are shaping this. We have this really exciting project that we're just starting at Keene State, which is to get faculty creating assignments with their students to create and edit Wikipedia articles that are connected to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Right, so pick an assignment that is related to climate change or zero hunger or ending poverty, and then say, let's get on Wikipedia and say what's going on in our local communities, what's going on in our global communities. And so Martha Burtis reminds us, like, our students are not just going on the web, they're constructing it, right? They're constructing it. And so the more that we can, again, as professionals in higher education, help to direct this, the more powerful that it can be. I want to talk about social media, because people say, really, Karen, Twitter? Ah, that's crap. You know, we know a certain person that tweets a lot, and it's terrible. And there's a reason that he does, right? Because he gets an audience for it. And so that's why we need to have counter voices that are out there. I use Twitter in my classes, as well as a little bit of LinkedIn and some other kinds of things. But this way, students can have conversations. They can do networking with other professionals. They can contribute information that's valuable. They can share resources and sources. They can connect with others in their community. They write something on that blog site that maybe nobody will read. The reason the guy in Turkey picked up that article is because she tweeted it. It opens up pathways to future jobs and careers. This is a quote from one of my students. I got into several conversations with professionals about how to save our planet and things that need to be done in order to make that happen. The student was just really excited about that. I found myself enjoying being on Twitter for a purpose other than entertainment. And I think that's a really powerful thing for a student to have said. You know, let's think about leveraging social media in the right kind of ways. I talk about Twitter as just a tool, right? A hammer is a tool. You can smash a windshield with it. You can build a beautiful home. It's not about the tool, it's about how you use it. And yeah, is it fraught with difficulty? Are there trolls out there? Are there safety issues? Is it even for all people? Absolutely not. And those are the kinds of conversations that we have to have with our students. You know, who is more vulnerable or at risk? Where does safety differ across the board for our different students? And again, the opportunity to have those conversations instead of just avoiding them. So open pedagogy can become public service in a way. The ways in which you can write about environmental issues and communicate about social issues and put that out to the public. And so, I don't remember who said this originally, but like, come for the OER, stay for the pedagogy. I want to talk a little bit about student trust, power, and agency, because one of those things that are on my big slide about open pedagogy is student agency, which is one of the things that's at the top of the list for me in all this. And again, when I say, start with one thing, I kind of mean that in here as well. So students can actually work with you to create content, as I talked about, but they can also do things like, let's write the syllabus together. You can go to your class and say, what do you guys want to do this semester? Okay. They can write their own attendance policy. You can crowdsource this and say, how would we like to have an attendance policy this semester? Or my individual students write their own individual attendance plan, and I have them submit that to me. They can create the learning outcomes for the class. There's pretty much nothing more uninteresting to students than a list of boring learning outcomes. And you can ask your students in this semester, remember those learning outcomes? They're like, no. Like, what? But if they wrote them, it's really different. And they might say, well, we don't know what to write. And I can say, well, these are some possibilities. What do you think about that? And they actually do come up with some really amazing things. Sometimes it overlaps a lot with what you were thinking anyway, but now they have agency over the creation process. Sharing power in the classroom, giving students agency, it makes all the difference in the world. They can determine what goes on during any particular class period. Students can design assignments. Like, why design them all yourself? I'm going to show you an example of that. They can decide what to make public or openly licensed. Like, we don't want to just reenact those colonizing mechanisms of education. You can say, would you like to openly license your content? I do not require my students to put an open license. That's exploitation, right? And so with my students, when I say, this is why I think it's valuable, this is what I think you'll get from this process, this is what I think is a possibility. We can talk about it for many weeks of the semester, and then students can decide whether or not they want to openly license their content. My students determine how they want to be graded. There's a whole big ungrading movement. I know we could spend the rest of the day talking about that, like how the hell do you do that? Don't you have to give a grade at the end of the semester? And so we can wait till the question period. I'll talk a little bit more about how I do that. But students can actually have a role in their own grading, or you can just stop grading. Like, what is the thing that you like the least about your job? Grading. I hated grading. So if you hate grading, just stop doing it. And we're going to talk about how. So here's an example of how students can contribute to creating assignments. This is just a Google document, an assignment database. So I write a couple of assignments, and then I ask my students to write assignments. And then, so students can choose to do whatever assignments are up there. They can do other students' assignments, they can do their own assignments, they can do my assignments. And they get really competitive with this because they want other students to do their assignments. So they write these really good assignments so other people want to do them too. So they get excited about doing the assignments and creating assignments. It's really quite fun. I want to take a step back to talk about students again and their situation. In particular, I want to talk about student anxiety, because a lot of what I'm talking about relates to this too. The statistics show that more than 60% of college students that have studied, 88,000, said they experienced overwhelming anxiety. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody in this room that our students are anxious most of the time. 40% said they felt so depressed they had difficulty functioning. We want to find ways to not contribute to this. We want to find ways to alleviate this. Back in 1985, it was only about 18% of college-bound seniors that felt overwhelmed and anxious. So that's changed quite a bit for probably a lot of different reasons. Right? And that number increased to 41% by 2016. What is it that's going on? There's a lot of different reasons out there. I'm not saying it's all our fault, but I think we need to be cognizant of the ways in which the system and the ways in which we do things actually contribute to this. This is a really wonderful book by John Warner called Why They Can't Write. And he talks a lot about the K-12 system, but he talks about higher ed as well. And he talks about how often within an educational system, we create atmospheres that put a greater value on achievement than on learning. When students think their only currency of value is their grade, they don't really care about learning anymore. They just care about jumping through hoops and succeeding. And that makes them anxious. They're like, you're nothing unless you have an A. You're not going to get a job. You're not going to go anywhere. No wonder they're anxious. Right? Standardized tests and assessments have just been sucking the life out of learning. Surveillance systems that track and monitor and punish and insist on compliance. This is what we're creating in our K-12 systems quite a bit. Like, did your student turn that paper in on Thursday? And I guess, if you're a parent of a young child, you see value in that too. But we have to be careful about how we're using these systems. I put some quotes up here that I've heard recently. This one on the top was written by a student of mine, a stay of execution. And what he called that was because his organic chemistry test got postponed by a week. Is this student anxious? Do you really want your students feeling that? And if people feel, I know organic chemistry professors I'm proud of that. Really? That's not anything to feel proud of, that you're basically terrorizing your students. That students, they just know how to work the system. It's crazy to me. They'll cheat, and they're grade grubbers. We spent their whole life that all they're taught that's important in school is how to get a good grade. And then we turn around and call them a grade grubber when they're worried about what their grade is. They came to my office and wanted 5 more points. Well, of course they did. They're anxious, and you've made them believe that that's the only thing that's valuable. Okay, so we need to think about these narratives. A colleague of mine once said, they don't know anything we taught them at the 100 level. Okay, well, is that their fault? Maybe partly, but stop blaming the students, right? We really have to turn the mirror around to ourselves and think about what it is that we could be doing better in our practices. And to me, this is very integral to open pedagogy. So I created this little chart to sort of try to connect these dots here. When we think about student anxiety, the financial stress that they're under, the powerlessness that they have, that part of this is due to the systemic issues in education, the standardization, focus on grades, surveillance, the high costs that they have to pay for tuition. There's also external factors, the systemic problems that are out there, economic, environmental, social, and cultural, especially for marginalized groups of students. And so, can OER cost savings help alleviate this to some extent? You know, it's part of what we can do. We can't do everything, but it is a piece of what we can do. And open pedagogy, the trust, the agency, the empowerment, the value to the world can help to alleviate this as well. And that's why I call this like this positive feedback loop of open pedagogy, because students actually can create and share knowledge about the educational system. I have education majors doing that, about environmental issues, about social justice issues, and actually feel like they're actually contributing to the alleviation of their own state of anxiety, and they feel like they want to be able to do something in the world. My students tell me they want to be able to be social change agents, that they want to have an impact on the world. My students tell me this every single day. They would like to be able to do something that feels like they're contributing. Right? There's a lot of mythology out there about millennials or Gen Z, like they don't care, they're apathetic. It's really completely just not true. I love this quote from Robin DeRosa. When my students gain access to knowledge, I want it to be part of a larger invitation. We trust, I love the word trust here, we trust that you have important lessons to teach the world, and we trust that the knowledge you access today will be changed by your perspective, that you'll open doors to new ideas that we, your current teachers, never could have taught you. You know, I love the idea of my students learning things that I can't even imagine teaching them yet. This is not all about me being the brilliant professor. Also, Robin reminds us that open is a process, it's not a panacea. Right? Not, no, we'll just open up your work and it's all going to be good. Like how we do this, the critical conversations that we have, the safety issues on the web. It's all part of our work and our responsibility as we're thinking about open pedagogy and how we enact it. Just want to talk a little bit about why people don't want to go on the web. Well, there's trolls out there. Oh, there's fake news. Oh, there's stuff that's wrong, irrelevant. Who cares about what you had for dinner? Like all this is a reason, like just don't go on the web. Okay, and so basically what they're saying is just say no. Because that really worked for sex and drugs. Like that's really, like, is this the hero? This is the kind of narrative we want to follow? You know, like I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, so our students, your students, my students, they're going online anyway. They are. They're going online with or without you. You know, with or without your guidance. Okay, and so is it really responsible to say, like, just turn off that smartphone? You know, don't use social media. Stay off the web. Don't post anything. Is that really responsible? Because they're doing it anyway. And so I hope I've convinced you that it's not just a responsibility, but an opportunity to get your students on the web, creating and making it the kind of space that we want it to be, contributing to the kind of democracy that we would like to build, to change the kind of crazy narrative that's going on in the world right now. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like worried for our actual democracy right now. And we have to help empower our students to cause a shift in what's going on culturally. And if faculty and staff in higher education don't guide students to think about their digital citizenship, their digital footprint, their contributions, who will? Or if we're not doing this. And again, it's such an opportunity, not just you better do this or you're a bad person. I really want you to just think about responsibility and opportunity very, very tightly interwoven. Just wanted to point out a really cool resource, the Check Please Starter Course, which is a wonderful way, way better than if you've heard of CRAP, the C-R-A-A-P, like how to find sources on the web and whether to figure out whether they're fake news or not. The Check Please Starter Course is wonderful. It's so much better than the CRAP method. They actually talk about that. I can give the link to this. I can tweet it out. I can email it. Put together by Mike Caulfield at University of Washington. Another resource is the Community of Practice for Open Education, a consortium for open educational resources, particularly for community colleges, the CCOER. They have a Twitter feed, a website, they have a listserv. They have stuff out every single day. It's really wonderful resources. I just want to end with this. These are some colleagues that work with data and students learning data. And I think we could change the word data in this to any discipline or anything. Like, what if we imagine teaching data or teaching at all as a place to start creating the connected, collective, caring world that we want to see? This is what inspires me every day. This is why I'm here today. This is why I drove here, 4 hours in the driving rain and to get here at 11 o'clock at night, to be able to be here to talk to people like you, to do this kind of work, because it really drives me. And so I just want to thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions. So, thank you. That's my Twitter handle. And the slides are openly licensed. So. Questions? Yes.
So my name is Katie Kumsky. I'm in the psychology department.
Okay.
And when I'm teaching personality theory, I taught it without a textbook, and I'm now teaching social psychology without a textbook. I'm basically
great.
Using PowerPoint to create these sort of internet excavation, sort of journeys into the web.
Okay, like with hyperlinks and things.
Hyperlinks,
yeah, nice.
For my students.
Great.
And I think that what the most profound thing that has happened and how it has changed my teaching is that oftentimes, especially in teaching personality theory, where I teach it in the summer, which is like in 1 month I teach the whole course, and I've traditionally told my students, well, we can think of this as like a European vacation where every day we're going to be in a different European country. And as a way to highlight the fact that psychology itself has been dominated by Western European male theorists, essentially.
Yep.
And we often give that lip service, in the classroom,
Right,
and then we're beholden to these textbooks that just reproduce that dynamic. And I just found that in teaching without a standard textbook, I of course cover the classics because those are the knowledges that students are expected to know.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was able to sort of create like the hidden figures of psychology,
Cool.
to broaden my curriculum without feeling the pressure that I was adding to the students' readings, or as with a traditional textbook, you give them chapters to read, and then if you want to provide them additional resources, it feels like an extra burden on the students. This way, I felt like it was very, it allowed me to kind of put some meat behind that criticism that I had raised off.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that it's wonderful to hear stories like that. I hope you all have a faculty learning community where you can share your experiences and ideas, and that gives other people ideas. And we talk about connecting our students in our classroom. We don't do it enough with our own faculty and staff. So what a great story. And what if that was up on a website somewhere for people to see as well? So it's excellent. Mm-hmm.
George Wachate, Economics. I like the idea about creating a project in which every student can contribute to write a chapter in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit how you handle technical issues like authorships or who revises it and how it works?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit more detail?
So sure, people can do this in different kinds of ways that you would like to do it. The way that I did it, and again, it's like a 2 years in progress project. So the authorship was that students originally were creating pieces on their web blogging spaces, what I'm calling those domain spaces. And so mostly individual students worked on things that they were interested in. And then when it came time to kind of curate it into the textbook, I created editorial teams. So I had an editor-in-chief, and then I had certain students that were the section editor for the conservation group, for the coral reef diversity group, for the environmental issues group. So we had these sort of subject sections. And so the section editors worked together to say, let's look at what's out there. What do we want to put in here together? They had all these discussions. I let my students decide everything. I would make, people are like, what do you do, Karen? You don't do anything anymore. But I actually would give them advice, or we would talk about it and say, well, you guys want to think about doing this? So you don't have to, you might want to. And so the section editors would kind of curate the content, and then they would be responsible for editing, going through and reading stuff, trying to fix grammar, factual errors, things like that. And ultimately, I did spend many weeks at the end of it, like I felt like I can't put this out to the world unless I read through every word again. And there were some things I had to fix here or there. I felt like, they don't have the right definition of this. I kind of have to fix that at some point. So it would be a little disingenuous to say that I didn't contribute at all to the project in that way. But that's also kind of my job too, to say, I think a better way to say this that will really accurately get that across. And actually it was very little that I had to do that. Because it had been written by students, edited by another group of students, curated, re-edited again, and then looked at again by all the alumni. By the time I went to do the final edit, there wasn't that much that I had to change. So it was pretty great, and what an experience for them.
How did you do your grading? You said
Yeah, people always want to ask me about my grading. So, and I know it's a good question, and people do. This whole ungrading movement, there are different ways that people do it. So the way I do it isn't necessarily the way others do it, and I can point people to a lot of resources. But what I do is I have my students do self-assessment. Okay, so I give them a form to fill out. They usually fill it out 3 or 4 times a semester, depending on the class. My freshmen do it 4 times. My first-year students do it 4 times. My upper-level students do it 3 times. So what a self-assessment form is I ask them questions about different pieces that are in the class, whether it's like some laboratory things that they're doing, whether it's their writing project, is it their blogging, is it their use of Twitter. I ask them, how would you describe your use of this? How would you describe your progress in this? And then the other column is, what grade would you give yourself for that? Okay, so they have about 15 questions or so, and then they have a lot of narrative that they write, just explaining what they've done. I have a question that says, if you haven't done this other stuff, what else have you done? What else would you think you've done? If you haven't done this thing, tell me why. Have you not done it because you haven't gotten around to it, or that you really don't see the value in it? If my student says, I don't want to do this is just crap, I'm like, great, what do you want to do? Do something else then. So we have this conversation. So the self-assessment form becomes a place for us to converse. So they give themselves a bunch of grades. And I say, don't worry about giving yourself an F if you didn't do something. So I try to get us to think differently, like, what does that grade mean? Because I noticed, when I first started doing this, a student would say, I haven't done that at all, C. I'm like, huh. I'm like, how is that a C? So what it communicated to me is that they see a C as a failure. Like a C is a really bad grade. And so we talked about that. We said, okay, well, what if you actually honestly said it was an F because you failed at doing it, but you're not stuck with that. It's not going to get averaged later. That you can turn that F into an A by the next time you fill out your self-assessment just by doing it. I'm so much more interested in my students making progress and learning and doing something than I am punishing them. Students feel punished by their grades. And in fact, one time a student wrote a piece. He said, I don't know this yet. I got a C in it because I don't know how to do it yet. Why are you punishing me for my learning? And that really stuck with me. So to try to get back to the practical answer to the question, so they all give themselves all of these different grades. They have Fs, they have As, it's all over the map. I don't average it. They just sit there as a conversation, as a barometer of how they're doing. Then the next time comes around and they do it again. And then they say, take a look at your previous self-assessment form. What have you done since then? Right? And so they honestly assess themselves. And what is most powerful to me about this experience is they do the metacognitive work of their own learning. Right? They think about how they learn. The number of my students that have said, I realize what kind of learner I am. I realize how I learn best. I want to do this instead of that because I learn better that way. And so it was so powerful to read that on a self-assessment form. By the time they've done 4 of these forms, and I'm not adding any of the grades up, I'm just kind of looking at all of them. At the very last one, I say, what overall grade would you give yourself for the semester? Okay. And I very rarely have disagreed with their grade because we've had a conversation about it all semester long. And so they give themselves the grade. And they don't all get A's. You know, a lot of them get A's. Sometimes they'll get B. Sometimes I've had to raise it. You know, I have students that are very self-critical. I think I should get a B, C in this. I'm like, I think you should get a B. You know.
Do you downgrade?
What's that?
Do you downgrade?
Have I downgraded? Once in a while, and sometimes and this is what people worry about. Well, they're just going to give themselves all A's, right? And so you can have a student that may start to do that, but if you communicate with them, you sit down with them, you say, let's look at your self-assessment form together. Like, why would you have an A? Like, show me where you get an A in this. You know, and so if they can't come up with anything, we'll say, let's put a C for now or a D, and then let's see if you can get it to where you want it to be. Okay, so that we have to create a dialogue and a conversation around grading, and again, it's really it's just so much more enriching for me as a professor and less punitive feeling to them. And the idea of like, what is a B or a C or D? What does that mean in the currency? But I feel like we're probably running out of time. I'm happy to talk more with people about it as well, and other ways that people do that too. They use different kinds of systems of grading. So. Is that it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much again to Karen, our keynote. So there will also be a couple of built-in breaks if anyone wants to speak more to Karen about her presentation.